Greetings to all. I am Elena. Today, I wish to recount an experience from long ago in my life. This may be the first occasion I feel compelled to share it, as this narrative is a significant element that has contributed to my development into the person I am now. The narrative unfolds at the age of 25, marking the moment I embarked on the journey of marriage with my husband, Alexander. Alexander stands tall, exuding an appealing presence complemented by a sophisticated demeanor. His eyes are a striking shade of deep blue, complemented by neatly styled brown hair and a captivating smile that leaves a lasting impression on everyone he encounters. Our paths cross thanks to a friend's introduction. Initially, I had low expectations for the matchmaking process, believing that love should unfold organically. From our very first encounter, Alexander made a remarkable impression on me. He possessed a refined elegance, coupled with remarkable politeness and thoughtfulness. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, reminiscent of two old friends reconnecting after years apart. From that moment forward, I sensed in him the warmth I had been seeking all along. Following a time of deepening our connection, we decided to unite in marriage. The wedding exuded simplicity, yet it was brimming with joy and happiness. That day remains vivid in my memory. As I donned a pristine white wedding dress, I clasped Alexander's hand, making my way down the aisle, enveloped by the warm blessings of our family and friends. As we exchanged our vows before all, I felt a profound certainty that I had discovered a person who would safeguard and nurture me for all time. Following the wedding, our existence unfolded like a delightful dream. Alexander was a dedicated partner, consistently nurturing and attending to my needs. He dedicated himself tirelessly and held the position of director at a company specializing in household materials. Even with a hectic schedule, he always made time to share a meal with me or engage in conversation after a long day. I considered myself fortunate, as I was blessed with a wonderful husband and a nurturing home. In the beginning, our life together felt like a beautiful dream that anyone could envision. Alexander embodied care, success, and love in his role as a husband. He held the esteemed position of director at a company dedicated to the production of household materials, a dream role attained through relentless dedication and hard work. Nevertheless, his commitments left him with scant time to devote to his family. Alexander's day began bright and early at 6 a.m. each morning. As he stepped out of his home to get ready for the day ahead, he arrived back home at 9 p.m. each night, occasionally extending into the late hours if lengthy meetings or significant projects required resolution. Alexander's company was quite a distance from our home. Even with the luxury of a BMW at his disposal, his daily commute to work stretched to nearly an hour. Whenever unexpected business trips arose, Alexander found himself away from home for a day or two. In those moments, a profound emptiness washed over me, and I found myself longing for him deeply. Dinners alone can occasionally bring a sense of melancholy, yet I remind myself that these sacrifices are ultimately for the brighter future we both aspire to. I find solace in the thought that he is putting in the effort not just for his own sake, but for the joy of our little family. Initially, all was well. Even with a packed agenda, Alexander consistently sought to compensate during his moments of leisure. Evenings were filled with shared moments, whether it was over dinner, enjoying a film, or engaging in conversations about the day's events. Our relationship was incredibly harmonious, and I could distinctly sense his love for me in every glance and every gesture. I once believed we were an ideal pair, destined for everlasting harmony. As time went on, the demands of his job began to weigh heavily on Alexander, leading to a gradual transformation in him. He frequently returned home weary and drained after a demanding day. Dinner had become a mere exchange of words, and rather than enjoying movies or engaging in conversation as we once did, he frequently retired early to ready himself for the demands of another workday. Each morning, in the quiet hours before dawn, he would slip out of the house. The hectic pace of our schedules left little room for us to share moments together. The distance didn't merely manifest during meals or conversations, it subtly infiltrated the fabric of our married life over time. Alexander frequently found himself too fatigued to engage with my longing for closeness. On certain nights, I made attempts to initiate a conversation or capture his attention. Yet he merely smiled and mentioned his need for rest. I understood he was truly worn out, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness and emptiness within me, despite my deep affection for him. I started to understand that my desire for love and care was no longer being fulfilled as it once was. For a young, dynamic woman like myself, this sensation transformed into a significant emptiness, growing ever more challenging to satisfy. I reassured myself that this was merely a challenging period in our marriage and that our love would triumph over all obstacles. Yet beneath the surface, I couldn't ignore the fact that this growing distance was starting to carve out spaces in our connection. In those days, I was a spirited young girl, brimming with energy and the fervent aspirations of youth. My husband, Alexander, frequently found himself occupied with his demanding job, and as a result, we had not shared an intimate moment in quite some time. The vacant days drifted by, imbuing me with an ineffable sense of loss. Often, I found myself letting go of those emotions in solitude within my room. It served as a means for me to confront the void left in Alexander's absence, a time when he no longer shared his love with me as he once did. On that day, much like any other, Alexander left for work early, while I remained at home to tend to the family and manage the household chores. Everything seemed normal. Nothing unusual happened. As the clock struck noon and I completed my household chores, an unsettling sensation ignited within me, akin to a smoldering fire deep in my heart. Throughout the week, Alexander was preoccupied and seemed to have no moments to spare for me. The absence of that connection left me yearning for an outlet to express my feelings. As I entered the bedroom, a sense of comfort enveloped me, and I allowed myself to unwind. For some reason, I couldn't recall whether I had closed the door, or perhaps it slipped my mind in my rush. I let my emotions carry me away, oblivious to everything around me. The atmosphere in the room was serene, and I found myself deeply absorbed in those emotions, unaware that anyone might be observing. Time seemed to slip away unnoticed. And when I finally lifted my gaze, I found myself staring at a figure poised just beyond the threshold. Mr. Richard, my father-in-law, was standing there. I stood in silence, utterly speechless. He gazed directly at me, his eyes fixated on the scene before him. It dawned on me that he had been there for an extended period, observing my every action without my awareness. In a state of confusion, I struggled to mask my bewilderment. "Father, what are you up to over there?" I inquired, my voice quivering. Mr. Richard began, as if emerging from a deep reverie. He hesitated, saying, "Oh, I was merely passing through." However, he then remarked, "No need to fret. I didn't observe anything." His words only deepened my confusion. He offered an explanation without my prompting, as though he were trying to conceal something. The stillness was overwhelming, and I sensed the weight of the atmosphere in the room grow palpable. In the wake of Mr. Richard's abrupt departure, I was left with a racing heart, grappling with the uncertainty of how to navigate this predicament. Throughout the day, the vision of him poised at the door lingered in my thoughts, leaving me uncertain about how far this would unfold. Just when I believed it was all over, it turned out that it wasn't. As the afternoon waned, the soft yellow glow of the setting sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm hue across the room. As I went about my routine of preparing dinner, everything felt familiar. Alexander still hadn't returned home. He was, as always, engrossed in his tasks at the company. The serene ambience of the house resonated with the rhythmic sounds of knives meeting chopping boards, accompanied by the enticing aroma of food simmering on the stove. Clad in a delicate white tank top paired with a knee-length skirt, I embraced the comfort of my surroundings. As I immersed myself in the art of cooking, an unsettling sensation washed over me, as though an unseen gaze was fixed upon me. Initially, I wondered if I was merely conjuring it in my mind. Yet that sensation only intensified, sharpening with each passing moment. As though that stare remained fixed upon me, my heart tightened a bit, and my hands froze in place. I gradually shifted my gaze, and in that instant, my eyes locked with Richard's, my father-in-law. He stood motionless at the kitchen door, his gaze locked onto me, unblinking. In that instant, I distinctly sensed the astonishment in his eyes, not merely a fleeting surprise, but a look that captivated me, refusing to be averted. I stood there, momentarily speechless, before finally managing to speak, striving to maintain a steady tone. "Dad, what captures your gaze?" Upon hearing my voice, Mr. Richard jumped, as though he had been abruptly yanked from a far-off reverie. His face turned slightly red, and he stammered, no, I was just thinking." Then he turned and hurriedly left the kitchen, his steps seeming to falter. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling both confused and uncomfortable. His actions reminded me of everything before. Ever since he saw me relieving myself in the room, I realized that every gesture and every look he gave me had something unusual. Only then did I realize that it wasn't my imagination. But he often looked at me longer than usual. Not only that, sometimes I caught him smiling to himself when his eyes stopped on me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a father's concern for his daughter-in-law. But I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Worse still, his accidental actions gradually became more obvious. When we passed each other in the narrow hallway, his hand lightly touched mine, even though it was only a fleeting moment. But it was enough to startle me. I didn't know if these things were intentional or unintentional, but they made me increasingly uncomfortable, feeling suffocated in my own house. And many times I saw him quietly observing me from afar, with a look that I couldn't clearly describe. I didn't know if it was curiosity, guilt, or something else. But his presence made me increasingly uncomfortable in this very house. Richard's eyes that afternoon still haunt me, and I don't know how to deal with this situation or just ignore it as if it never happened. One fine morning, the gentle sunlight shone into the kitchen, and our family was having breakfast together as usual. The atmosphere of the meal was quite peaceful. The clatter of chopsticks and bowls broke the silence. Near the end of the meal, my husband Alexander looked up at the whole family and announced that he was going on a 4-day business trip. He said it was an important project, and he couldn't refuse. I smiled and nodded as usual, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. The days without him always left me empty, and this time was no exception. Alexander left the house right after breakfast. As usual, I started clearing the table, stacking the dishes in preparation for washing. In the house, only my father-in-law, Richard, and I were left. The atmosphere suddenly became quieter than ever. I was still focused on my work, but for some reason I felt heavy inside, as if something unusual was about to happen. As I was busy cleaning, I suddenly felt a strange warmth from behind. Mr. Richard's two rough, strong hands suddenly hugged me tightly. I was startled, dropped the towel in my hand, and my heart pounded as I tried to turn around to look at him. Before I could say anything, Mr. Richard gently said, his voice hoarse and trembling, "Elena, can I hold you for a moment?" His words made me freeze. My whole body stiffened. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. At that moment, I clearly felt the conflict in my heart. I wanted to resist. I wanted to push him away immediately. But my body seemed to no longer listen to me. I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, and said, in a firm voice, "Dad, you can't. Doing that is wrong." But Mr. Richard did not let me go. He tightened his arms around me, his breath tickling my ear. I could feel the tension in his body. He continued, his voice filled with emotion that I could not tell if it was regret or pain. "Elena, I know this is wrong, but I can't hold it in anymore. I've kept this inside for too long." I trembled, feeling both shame and anger. I tried to break free from his embrace, but he held me tight. Then he continued speaking, as if he wanted to pour out all the feelings he had kept hidden for so long. "I can't forget that image. I didn't mean to look, but I can't stop thinking about you. I'm sorry, but I can't control myself anymore." Hearing these words, I felt like everything around me was collapsing. My face was red, not only from embarrassment, but also from anger and panic. I tried to push him away once more, this time with all my strength. Finally, Mr. Richard let go of my hand. I turned around and looked straight at him, my voice trembling but full of determination. Dad, what you are doing is wrong. I can't accept this. Please stop here. Mr. Richard bowed his head, his eyes avoiding, but then quickly looked up, his eyes showing a strange determination. He stepped closer, his voice as if trying to suppress something. Elena, I can't hide these feelings anymore. I know this is wrong, but do you understand? Since that moment, since I saw you, I can't stop thinking about you. Do you know how much this feeling hurts me? I stepped back, my hands gripping the edge of the dining table, my heart pounding with anger and fear. Dad, this isn't right. This is our family. You shouldn't be thinking like this. But he didn't stop. He stepped forward, his voice urgent, almost pleading. Elena, just this once. I promise I won't let this go any further. Just this once. I can't hold it in any longer. I turned away, trying not to let his eyes waver. Dad, please stop. This is a family. We can't do anything to break it up. Mr. Richard let out a breath, but he didn't back down. Elena, I can't forget that image. I tried. I really tried. But I couldn't. You're the only one who makes me feel alive again after all these years of being alone. You don't understand. I felt a surge of anger, mixed with guilt and helplessness. I turned around and looked straight at him, my voice more determined than ever. Dad, I can't. I will never do this. This is my family, my husband. Please stop now before things become irreparable. My words were like a strong blow that made him stunned. He looked at me, his eyes full of pain and disappointment. After a long while, he lowered his head, his voice hoarse. Elena, I'm sorry. I don't deserve to be your father-in-law. I don't know why I acted like that. It's just that I couldn't control myself. I kept my eyes coldly fixed on him, trying to stay calm even though my heart was pounding with mixed emotions. I took a deep breath, then said, my voice trembling but firm, I hope you understand this has to stop right here. This is our family, and I would never cross any boundaries. Mr. Richard was silent, only nodding as if accepting what I said. Then he stepped back, his eyes filled with regret and fatigue. He turned around, bowed his head, and walked heavily out of the room. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, as if carrying heavy guilt. As he faded away, I stood there, my whole body shaking. Despite my relief, my heart continued to race. I clenched my fists, trying to calm myself. I was aware that if this situation escalated, both he and I would inadvertently cross an unforgivable boundary. And from that day on, my father-in-law almost disappeared from the daily routine of the house. He rarely went out, often staying in his room, leaving everything as if it had nothing to do with him anymore. Whenever he appeared, it was only for a few short moments when he quietly passed by, not saying a word, not looking at me. The atmosphere in the house became heavy, and his silence was an invisible reminder of what had happened. Alexander had no idea. He thought his father was just going through a sad phase or feeling lonely as he got older. One day, when he noticed that Richard was no longer as enthusiastic about gardening as he used to be, Alexander said to me at dinner, I think Dad is tired or something is wrong. He doesn't go out as much as he used to, and he's not interested in the things he used to love. Maybe I should take the time to talk to him. But honestly, I don't know where to start. I just nodded, trying to keep my anxiety down so as not to reveal anything suspicious. I guess Dad just needs some time off, I said, my voice soft but my heart in turmoil. I knew Alexander didn't suspect anything, but his words made me feel even more guilty. Only I knew the real reason Richard had withdrawn, and it haunted me every day. I often wondered if things would ever go back to the way they were. I wanted to forget it all, to be as normal as if nothing had ever happened. But Richard's eyes, when he looked at me, on the rare occasions we saw each other in the house, still carried an indescribable heaviness. Not resentment, but a dull pain, as if he were trapped in his own insurmountable guilt. I don't know what to do. Try to ignore everything, or face it to find a way to resolve it. Either way, I still feel that the distance between me and him, as well as the peace in this family, is getting further and further away. I can only hope that time will help everything fade away. But deep down, I know these wounds will never heal. After all, I realize that the moral boundary is something that should never be crossed under any circumstances. Immediate emotions, moments of weakness, can cause irreparable consequences, hurting both myself and those around me. I understand that silence or avoidance is not the way to solve the problem, but only makes things worse. The most significant lesson I've learned is the importance of strength, standing my ground, self-respect, and safeguarding the family's core values. Through this story, I want to share with everyone an important lesson in life. Always maintain ethical boundaries and personal values. Sometimes, our immediate emotions or difficult circumstances can lead us to overreact. But it's important to remember that stepping over these boundaries can destroy everything we possess, including calmness, steadfastness, and the ability to say no. The wrong situations are the ways to protect yourself and your family. I also advise that in family relationships, understanding and communication are very important. Don't be afraid to share your feelings and concerns with your loved ones, especially your spouse. To avoid misunderstandings and unnecessary distance, always cherish what you have. Don't let moments of weakness destroy the happiness you have built. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next videos.